So you disagree with me.
I'm sorry, I agree with you. You're the one with the weapon.
Gardens
Moons.
of the...
Lend us your ears. And a huge thank you to all of our Patreons.
Thank you to the Pit Fighters, the First Swords, and all of the Bright Stars, Truth and Courage. Do you like Warrens?
Maybe.
If you do, please read Gardens of the Moon. This is the beginning of Stephen Erickson's behemoth, that is Book of the Malazan. And I think Gardens of the Moon is actually his smallest entry.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh my word.
It's tiny.
It's tiny compared to the rest. Yes, we both read Gardens of the Moon, one of the most famed fantasy books out there, and we are here to talk about it today. We absolutely love discussing it on the Discord as we progress. Please head over there if you want to see our more in-depth thoughts and other books that we're reading. But we're here today to talk about book one of this epic series. So it is infamous for being confusing. And so in this video, we're going to try to do the opposite. We love a tangent. We go on a wild one often with these reviews. But
we are tangential.
A little bit more structured. We'll still obviously go a bit random, but we are going...
We take random Warrens.
Exactly. We do. And you'll understand what Warrens are if you haven't read it in a little bit. So we're going to organise this review. We're going to talk about the good, then the bad, then some spoilers, and then at the end, no spoilers again. And we'll talk about if we're going to carry on with this series and if we would recommend it. But before any of that, we're going to talk about what is it actually about.
Yeah, so Gardens of the Moon was released in the 1990s.
It was.
It's a 10-book series, the Book of the Malazan, and it's by Stephen Erickson. Co-created the world with Ian Esselmont. And I think you also will, and anyone on Booktube who likes fantasy books would have heard of the Book of the Malazan being the most complex, the most incredible fantasy series, and we're here to kind of confirm that as well. But it's kind of agreed widely that if you haven't read the Malazan, then you don't get your fantasy reader card. And
it should be arriving any day now.
I'm really excited for it.
Yeah.
It's not on Amazon, unfortunately, so it's not next day delivery, but it should be here by the end of the
Maybe
decade.
Philip Chase can organise it for us because, of course, he's a huge Malazan fan.
He is,
so hopefully he'll be sending it our way any day now.
A huge Malazan fan.
Yeah, he
Pushing
is.
6 foot.
Oh dear,
Who
Ed's
knows?
classic joke.
Who
but
knows?
this is an epic fantasy series of just huge proportions.
Magnanimous scope.
But in it, we follow not actually too many characters. There's a lot of characters mentioned. There's a lot of places mentioned.
Only 73.
We'll talk about a bit later, but when you first read the first few chapters, I was like, whoa, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah.
But the characters you follow, it's multi-POV, and there is a lot of political machinations going on. Yeah. We've got the Malazan Empire, and it is in a period of turmoil. There's a new empress. We're not quite sure about the turnover of power, although we know
We're not quite sure about much.
There were some assassinations. We know that.
Yeah.
And we know that things are in a very fragile state. Kind of the old guard are still around, and they remember the good old days. And the empress, she doesn't really like that.
She doesn't like the good old days.
And so we meet some of the new guard, we meet the old guard, and in a very small portion of the empire. So there's so much we don't know about, but we follow a small portion, and then we've got gods playing their hand in this world as well.
So we have alternate planes of reality, of existence. We have POVs flitting in between these realities and existences, these planes, these landscapes, and all of this stuff we're going to be saying we're not quite sure about, because what Stephen Erickson does is he just basically lobs you into the thick of the action. He does not explain anything in terms of exposition. What he does is he lets you experience the world from the eyes of the characters as they would in that moment, rather than them discovering things for the first time. He only does so if it fits with that character actually discovering something for the first time. I'm
going to let this lead into the good, because it is, for me, I loved that aspect of this story, that it feels these characters, a lot of them are kind of veterans, a lot of them are very high up figures of the Empire and the enemies of the Empire as well. And so it made sense that this isn't the first time they've accompanied these events. So that felt awesome. And also, as I said before, this series is infamous for being utterly confusing and you get lost in the events that are unfolding. But I read the first few chapters and I kind of understood what was going on, but I thought I must have missed stuff. I just must have. And I looked up, there's Malazan wiki. It's awesome that people have spent the time making that.
Yes.
And
that is a great thing about this series, by the way.
They've made sure to only include the information that you need to know.
Nice.
And there's nothing lost on me. So
I understood everything.
Not like that. No, I was going to say there's a difference between not knowing and not understanding.
Yeah.
I feel like you're meant to not know a lot because it is breadcrumbs for later on. There's quite a lot of threads that are opened up that aren't sealed in this book and often not
they
followed
weren't
up
stitched
yet.
very well.
But I feel like that is intentional. There was things I was thinking at first. Oh, I'm meant to be tying so many different things together. I need my notepad out, get the spreadsheet going. But after reading those first few chapters, I thought, you know what? I need a little bit more confidence in myself. I've heard quite a few Malazan readers say that, that it's kind of been exaggerated so much that people feel like they really need to basically study it.
People find it incredibly intimidating to actually begin. Now, what I would say as someone diving into Gardens of the Moon for the first time like us, then I would suggest reading it with a group of people, buddy reading it. So I always find if you're having these conversations with people, you're finding yourself reading it in a different way. You're immersing yourself completely. And I think what you put into Gardens of the Moon or the Book of the Malazan, you get out of it as well. So the more attention you focus on reading it cooperatively with people, then the more you're going to get out of this.
Very, very true, Ed. And now my next point for the good is the political machinations. As I said, we follow a lot of characters, senior positions. We follow Adjunct Lorne, the right hand to the Empress, who is kind of an enemy of magic forces. We've got Whiskey Jack and Dujek One Arm, who are these very senior commanders who belong to the old guard. But then we also follow those that are on the rise through the ranks. We follow Paran, great character, and I loved this mix of kind of those striving with ambitions, some very personal desires, and then those carrying out their duty. And there are so many questions of what is going on. Is Dujek One Arm, is he starting a rebellion? Is he going to turn against the Empress?
There's always questions that are being asked, and rarely are they answered right away, which I think we kind of fall in the trap of in the 21st century. That if a writer or a film or a show, if they show us something, I want to find out the answer right there. No, Stephen Erickson's left it with us to hold that in our mind. We'll probably forget about it, but when it's revealed later on, you're going to have this kind of spark of remembrance, and you're going to be, oh, that's where that's happened from.
And I will talk about this point further in detail in the spoilers section with some examples, but I thought two of the greatest examples of a convergence of threads took place in Gardens of the Moon.
Yeah.
It was absolutely sensational where the political machinations build up, and there's kind of a mini climax in a political scene. Yeah. And you flip between 4 or 5 different POVs in those chapters. Oh my gosh, it was just some of the best writing I've ever come across. And I'll be talking about it later in the spoilers, but it really shows that it's a really tight craft. Whilst I see a lot of people, as they're about to dive into Malazan, and say, there's just so much, is it going to be tightly written? I can't stand something that's just loose and not tied together. It really feels like every word is meant to be
it's very purposeful.
In here. Yeah. And so, that's another aspect for the good for me, is the political nations to the very full.
Yeah, I want to reiterate that this book is big in scope, but sometimes it's intimate with its characters. But what I love about it is that, as Will said, this convergence of POVs and threads. There are scenes here that are amongst the best of fantasy. Philip Chase will like that. But no, they honestly are. There are 3 or 4 scenes here that are just, I would put them, if I was going to, rank fantasy scenes, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, etc. These scenes would be in there, and it's only book 1 of this 10-book series. So, I'm buzzing. I'm buzzing about carrying on the series. And
another thing for me is that over the last year, I've read a bit less fantasy. It's probably still my favourite genre, but I think I've read so much in the last few years. I've been searching for originality in other genres, I think, to have a bit of a break, basically. I thought that there's a lot of fantasy kind of doing similar things, and they each do them very well, but it feels like there wasn't something truly unique. It feels quite rare nowadays, I think. And so that's something I've really been yearning for. And so probably more than the average person, I loved Gardens of the Moon for its freshness. Yeah. I thought this is truly, truly unique. And I think even those who don't like Gardens of the Moon will still respect that.
Yeah.
Of course, it's such a well-known series, I imagine that anyway. But I just thought this is so fresh. And so whilst it did take quite a bit of work at times, because there's so many different threads, I found that so rewarding, because I was at a time where I could dedicate that momentum to it.
It is an experience, isn't it? It feels like going to the cinema. It feels like you are completely immersed in this 360 scope of the Malazan world.
Yeah.
And it's such an interesting feeling as someone who, reads a lot and reads a wide array of genres. Seeing this grandness play out was just like liberating. It felt really it felt fresh. Even though how does Stephen Erickson keep it fresh when he's writing about things, wars and rebellions, things we read about often, things we read, probably 90% of the books we read are about wars and rebellions and like found family as well and all that kind of things. But how does he keep like tropes and themes feeling fresh? He's a great writer.
Fantastic. Yeah. Really fantastic. I think that's it for me for the good.
Yeah, and I would definitely say that even though there were some dips in the book, it feels like there's an escalation. So you've got a small climax and then a larger climax, and then at the end, it blows everything out.
A massive climax,
the climax goes into the sky.
So the pacing was really good.
Pacing was great.
Now onto the bad. I don't have too much to say. I think point one is there is a mini romance in here, which the characters kind of are like very in love with each other, and I didn't really understand why. There wasn't really much building towards it. And
it's funny because the rest of the world feels so real and grim, but also I would attach it rather than grim to real. Yeah, and then that romance, it felt like not very real. Like it felt manufactured.
Yeah, and I thought it didn't bring it down for me because it wasn't a massive detriment because it's not too huge.
It's a bit of an eye roll though, isn't it?
But I think because it is a huge, without spoilers, a huge force of drive for a character to do what they do, a central character, and it didn't just feel like it clicked in me. I just thought maybe there's more to this that'll be revealed. Yeah. Maybe there's a spell at work, but it feels like the love felt, as you said, a bit manufactured. But luckily it was more of a subplot. It was something in the background used to give drive to the character, but it wasn't at the forefront, and it also didn't last too long. So it wasn't something that dragged the story down terribly for me, but it was something that it was the first moment, as you said, that I thought, it doesn't feel quite as organic as everything else.
Yes, and when Stephen Erickson set it up to everything to feel so organic, when something goes a bit left wing, then you're a bit like, oh.
Yeah.
So what did I maybe dislike about this is that there were a couple of characters that I didn't vibe with. One of them you're talking about, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. But this isn't. I don't think it's a series where you fall in love with characters like you do. Like, I would always go to Faith in the Fallen, but I think I'll use the example of the First Law. Like, I completely love Logan Nine Fingers as a character. I grow to love Glocta, but from the beginning, I'm behind Logan. I want him to succeed. These characters, you have these feelings over them, but I never found like an emotional connection to any of them where I was in fear of their lives. A little bit like what I was talking about when we were talking about Grave Empire. But that's okay, because I still loved this book. I still found the characters were written with depth and with a freshness to them, and they were fantastically crafted. But I didn't have this, because there were some scenes where they are put close
to the wire.
Yeah, exactly, to the wire.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to have that fear that like my favourite character wasn't going to make it out of this. Although there is one character who I did get behind. But because it's such a wide scope, you want to diversify your feelings, don't you?
So I'm going to disagree with you slightly. This is the one thing of two people reviewing a book. There were some characters I didn't get behind as much in a separate place.
So you disagree with me.
I'm sorry, I agree with you. You're the one with the weapon. But I think there were probably, for me, 3 or 4 characters that when they one-up someone, I was like, oh, yeah, that feels good.
I get that.
To me, that emotional release, whilst I would agree, I didn't feel the same love as I feel for Logan.
Yeah.
But that sense of catharsis in those moments, I think...
Maybe I'm being unfair because...
It even shocked me a little bit.
It's hard to write a character to that level.
I do agree. But and obviously it's not as much page time because it's split quite a lot. But I was quite shocked myself about how much catharsis I felt in those kind of fist pump worthy moments. And so, slight disagreement there.
Our negative is turning into a positive.
It is,
which is always a good thing. So it is a broad scope. And at times, it maybe felt a bit too broad, I would say. Like, it could have kind of petered down a little bit. But I have a feeling like, so this is the second time I read it, but the first time I wasn't in it, I wasn't in the zone. This time I'm a much different reader. So I would say that if you have read it before and you didn't enjoy it, try it again, because this time around I got a lot more out of it than the first time. I mean, with all of that scope, you feel like you're playing 22 games of chess, blindfolded at the same time. But then to swerve it onto a positive, by the end of the book, you feel like you've won all 22 games blindfolded. So even though there is an epic scope, and while you're reading it, you can kind of, flounder a little bit, you, by the end of it, you are completely attached to the story.
I see, building on what you've been talking about with scope, I love a huge scope, but I feel like with a book, it kind of has to start and go wider.
Escalates.
Because I don't care about it if I'm not invested yet. I loved the first 2 chapters, and then there was, and that's kind of setting the tone with different POVs. And then you get to your main characters. And chapters 3, 4 and 5, I felt there was too much going on with no investment in the political machinations yet. It wasn't necessarily huge scale things unfolding.
I get you.
But there was kind of players making their moves and big things happening that should have big implications you should care about. But I wasn't yet quite at the point of investment, and that's why I think that kind of V shape is really important.
I guess that's what he's going for, though, because he doesn't want you to start at the beginning of everything. He wants you to start in the fold of all of this destruction and catastrophe that's about, that's happening, as well as what has happened and what is about to happen as well. So I guess, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? You didn't have the investment, but if he didn't do that, then you'd feel like you're starting at the beginning and it wouldn't be true to his storytelling.
Exactly, and I think I'd rather have a tiny bit of a slower start and a great middle and end rather than the inverse, which you often find in a book.
I did love the escalation, though, where
that's what
rises and then rises. So, I get what you mean.
Yeah, nice. So I think that's the end of the bad. That we had far more good than bad. And now, onto a little spoiler talk. This isn't going to be really in-depth, at least on my part. Not sure what you've got
let's just talk about Animander 8 for 12
minutes. Let's talk about him. But so, if it's right, can I talk about chapter 9?
Please do.
Oh my gosh, one of the best chapters I've ever read. Chapter 9 is the dinner with Lorne, Tattersail, Dujek, Taishren, Tok the Younger.
Talking of chessboard, the key players, they're all queens on the chessboard.
They are. Honestly, the threads converging in this, they are all separate and they have their own separate conflicts going on.
Yeah.
And they all converge. And the culmination of it all happening at the same time, all conveyed in dialogue. So Will, so good.
I think that is that. You know what you're talking about in your negativity of the scope. Don't forget about the Siege of Pale.
Yeah,
that is the scene. That brought us in.
Oh, honestly, from chapter 9 onwards, so chapter 9 I think to chapter 13, I thought, this is just sensational. Wow. And it kind of kept that for the rest of the book. This is definitely probably my favourite chapter. But it really just suddenly kicked it up a notch, in my opinion. I ramped it up to 11, and that scene was just simply extraordinary. I mentioned it on our Discord, and Philip Chase said that it's one of the scenes he's talked about the most in regards to Gardens of the Moon. And I'm not surprised. I thought the character craft on display was fantastic. The characterisation leaking through. We've got a giant Lorne letting her pass really overwhelm her for a second. And then she's reminded of her duties, even by those she thought would side with her. And then we've got Dujek and Taisha and the politics of who's really in control unfolding. And Tok the Younger I thought was a great character.
I love Tok the Younger.
He's on he's not got as much power as those above him, but he's so sharp. And he knows everything that's going on, a lot more than everyone else, really, in one way, because he's a bit more grounded and a lot of people trust him. And he's got those conflicted loyalties, which I love in a character. Which way are they going to turn? I thought chapter 9 was truly sensational.
Yeah, completely agree, Will. And seeing all those key characters play out through action, and it feels like action, even though it's dialogue. It reads like a Tarantino script, doesn't it? Where the words are have as much power as a drawn sword. So I absolutely love that. I mean, going on to the negative, Crocus was what not brought the book down for me, but he didn't add to my enjoyment. I would say he detracted. He
flounders around.
He does flounder around, and I get that kind of character that you're wanting to, that you sometimes need in a book for different purposes. But it did feel like his delivery wasn't organic, like you were mentioning earlier as well. And his kind of his attitude to everything just got on my nerves eventually.
Yeah, I was going to say, I did enjoy that Crocus, as compared to most of the characters, he's naive. Most of the other characters, they've been hardened by many years of torment, and they're all very kind of big political players, and they all have huge ambitions, and they can cause big events to unfold. I did like the range in that is introduced with Crocus, his naivety kind of flounders around, but I do agree he felt a bit too much out of his depth.
Yeah, and out of the world. It felt like he didn't fit with it. Although the double edge to that sword, because it's a broadsword, obviously, is that you have the dislike of Crocus, but you have the juxtaposition of Sorry. And seeing those two characters and
then together,
the parallels were brilliant. But Sorry is such a fascinating character,
fantastic,
and someone who I feel is going to have some
big part to play,
incredibly big moments of the series. I mean, is she going to have bigger moments than Anamanda Rake, whose sword?
Anamanda Rake
is just so cool.
He is so cool because I love that. You're scared of him, then you really like him, and then you hear another character say some negative things about him, and you think, oh, okay, and then you see him again, you're like, he's awesome.
Yeah.
Why did I doubt myself?
He built him up perfectly, because at the Siege of Pale, you've got all of, Tattersall and that whole shebang, that whole cabal, basically, are in terror that he's up there, and they're all having to work together, and think how powerful these people are. And that was a truly epic, battle that showed, I think, it was just a little taster into Stephen Erickson's mind. It was just one of the starters into how epic this series is going to get.
Oh, I love the subplot of it. I think it's Belurdan and Night Chill. So Night Chill's killed, and Belurdan wants to bury her. He was a great character. It was fantastic. A little subplot, minor characters. Yeah. Really added.
That's what you can have, though, when you write this grim style of epic fantasy that... it felt like Stephen Erickson wasn't writing with pressure of keeping a storyline basic. It felt like he was able to explore these side characters who get a couple of mentions, but they do make an impact. Now, my favourite chapter was, I believe, chapter 15, the convergence at the mounds, which was just incredible, with the hounds and Anamanda Rake turning up, and Paran. I love Paran.
He says, "Are you powerful?" Something like that, and then he's like, hesitating. I think that should be answering.
Yeah, I mean, Paran is one of my favourite characters, because you do kind of experience those new things of the world through his eyes. Yeah, and he's not naive, but he's in a whole new world, similar to Crocus, where he's in a new world. But Paran, and the way that his attachment to Tattersall, and then his kind of loss, his grief, that then means that he just wants to go for these hands.
Adjunct Lorne.
Yeah, exactly. Go for Lorne. And he is like a type of vengeance is brewing within him. And I love the way that he becomes this hopeless character. Yeah. It plays out really, really well.
It did. I did really like the character of Hairlock. And maybe it was me imagining it wrong. I actually laughed in chapter 15 because Hairlock, he's crazy, he's terrifying. And then it describes Quick Ben cuts his strings because he's got the puppet. He literally... just flops and he says, "Lift me up." And I don't think it should have been.
The sense of humour is there.
I was going to say, I don't know if it should have been funny, because the hounds of hell are basically encroaching. Yeah. And I just couldn't stop laughing, because I just imagine this terrifying figure just suddenly just flopping down.
There are some really funny moments in Girls on the Moon, even though it doesn't feel like a funny world. I will say, I think Whiskey Jack and Quick Ben are not great names. They're such great characters, but the names don't suit them.
I like them.
I think I'm in the minority here.
I loved the scene where Quick Ben goes to Shadow Throne. And then fantastic dialogue.
Great,
just as he leaves, he's like, "Oh,
by the way,
you mentioned that I can't have been that high up in your services."
Yeah.
Well, and he leaves, and he just hears Shadow Throne shouting, "No!"
An epic mic drop moment.
It was. Yeah. And the last scene I want to talk about is chapter 21, which is another convergence of threads, and it's the ball mixed with the duel, and Anamanda Rake's there with a mask on, and then Whiskey Jack.
That was a great duel.
Whiskey Jack and everyone sees him, and then back up, and then you've got everything unfolding again. And I said I wasn't as keen on the characters aside from Whiskey Jack's squad and all that section, and Darajastan. I wasn't as keen on them as a whole. Yeah. I quite like Krupp as a character, and I liked Baruch. But
I mean, Ed wasn't the biggest fan of Creep.
Oh, the third person.
Because Ed feels like Creep had some very silly dreams.
Okay.
No. I think it brought a freshness to the world, didn't it?
Yeah, and but in that scene, I really enjoyed the role of those characters, and it showed that even if you're not loving the characters, what they contribute can still be fantastic.
And I do feel the need to go and reread his dreams.
Yeah, because they seem like they're pretty important.
Yes.
But Exhibit C of the Convergence of Threads. And then I love the characters such as Anamanda Rake. I did actually read that he was meant to be one of the leading POVs. And then Stephen Erickson was like, I can't convey how someone several thousand years is going to think and feel. And I think that's a fantastic choice. Because Anamanda Rake, not being in his mind, but seeing his actions.
It is. I think it's a much better technique of portraying these epic characters. Because to get it right is near impossible.
Yeah,
and he's right. Like this guy would have such an alien perspective that he would not think in any way that we would be able to even attach ourselves to. We might find it nuanced, but it wouldn't be to the level that it needs to be. And that's coming from Stephen Erickson, who's obviously a legend. Yeah,
so I thought that's fantastic and very interesting as well. Yeah, because Anamanda Rake was a great character, and I want to see more from Caladan Brood.
Yes, well, I think Dead House Gates might have the answer there. Are you excited for Dead House Gates?
I am. So, a little spoiler for what's coming next. I guess we're getting Ed into the decision. Yeah. So, first up, what would you give Gardens of the Moon? Would you approve? What's a scale you're going to give it?
I think enjoyment, I would give it like a 4.5. 4.5 overall. I didn't have that emotional connection to it. But it has so many incredible things, and it made me excited about reading fantasy again. There's just a tiny bit of me that is holding back to falling in love with it. I think I need a little bit more, and hopefully I get the answers in Dead House Gates.
I'm going to give it 4.5 as well, because I'm in awe of the world that Stephen Erickson has made. It's magnificent, but again, not quite got to that emotional attachment yet. And so the thumbs up, that thumbs down, Gladiator style. Will we be carrying on?
Incorrect, Ridley Scott style.
Book of the Fallen. So thumbs up, will we continue? Thumbs down, will we won't? Yeah, we will. I will probably be reading Dead House Gates in March or early April.
Wow,
because I have a break from uni for a month and a half.
I think we're planning April.
Okay, well, maybe I'll start a week early, because this one I did a bit late. So maybe I'll start a week early and I can make up for it.
Nice.
But there we go. Please let us know in the comments below anything that you think would help us. Anything you agree with, disagree with. We love that kind of discourse. And join the Discord.
Nice segue.
If you would like to hear more discussion on this. We're really looking forward to talking more about Malazan, and I feel like it could be something that's discussed a lot on the channel in times to come.
I am itching to have a new incredible series to latch onto, and I think if you love Book of the Malazan, it's 10 books. Will
it is?
What a great thing to really get into. I love the first law. I love having so many books to talk about. So this is going to be great for us.
And I wonder if I'd be allowed to do a dissertation on it. Maybe. But everyone, thank you so much for watching. Truth and Courage, the Brothers Gwynne.
Truth and Courage, the Brothers Gwynne.